Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing another thriller recommendation video. It's been quite some time since the last time I did a thriller recommendation video, and this is actually my 11th video in this video series I've been doing on my channel for a number of years now. So if you're watching this video and you're looking for even more thriller recommendations, I'll have all the previous times that I've done this down in the description so you can go and check those videos out. But before we do jump into today's video, I have to say a huge thank you to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video. If you haven't heard of Book of the Month by now, then I'm not sure where you've been, but if you haven't, let me tell you all about it. Book of the Month is a super popular and fast-growing online book service for readers. Their mission is to promote new and emerging authors and help readers discover books that they love. Their team vets the hundreds of different releases that come out every single month, and they pick the top few that they think their audiences would be the most interested in reading. Sometimes they have only 5 selections, sometimes now they have even up to 7 selections, which is amazing because there's always just so many to choose from. I actually find it really hard trying to pick which book I want for that month. And Book of the Month is risk-free because you can skip any month with no penalty, but you know, once again, guarantee you're not going to want to skip because now that they have sometimes even more than 5 selections, like it's kind of hard just to choose one, let alone like you're not going to want to skip, you know? And they have the best prices for new hardcover fiction books because usually when you walk into a bookstore, you're going to find any book from like $26 to $28, like very expensive, but for a limited time, you can use the code CYBER5 to get your first book for just $5. Like, I'm sorry, what? Say again? Only $5 for a new hardcover fiction book? Like, that is less than a cup of coffee at most places. And in the month of November, they have some very exciting picks. One of the books that I chose is The Wilder Women. This one is like a magical realism type of story that follows these women. It sounds very interesting. The cover is absolutely stunning, agree? And then I also decided to add on Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. This one is a romance that I've been really intrigued by. I'm also a huge fan of this cover. And I love that Book of the Month not only has, you know, a certain amount of selections every month, but they also have a bunch of add-ons every month, and a lot of the times the add-ons are also books that I'm very excited about. Go ahead, I don't know what you're waiting for. Please use the link in my description to go and check out Book of the Month and get your first book for just $5. Thank you so much once again to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video, and now let's jump into the thriller recs, shall we? Okay, so jumping right into the thriller recommendations, the first one that I have is gonna be the one on this list that's the most, like, not thrillery. I know you're like, Gabby, what the fuck? What the fuck did I just sign up for? But the reason why I want to include it in this video is because it's one of my favorite books of the year, and I do think people that read thrillers would really enjoy this book because it's notes on an execution. And I know that calling this book a thriller is a bit of a stretch because this one does lean a little bit more towards the, like, slow burn mystery, almost like literary fiction style of writing, but I still feel like I need to include this book because I need to push it on more people, okay? In this story, we're following this man named Ansel, who is a serial killer who is on death row, but we kind of get his life through the perspective of 3 different women that are in his lives. Like, one of the perspectives is from his mother, and then we get these other women that he's interacted with throughout his life. And it's interesting and it's beautiful. It's not exactly like the most fast-paced, like, thrilling story that you would ever read, but it is very thought-provoking. Like, that is the #1 thing that I took away from this book, is that it's so thought-provoking. It'll make you think. I just love the way that this description even talks about this book when it says it's a chilling portrait of womanhood as it simultaneously unravels the familiar narrative of the American serial killer. It also just kind of makes you take a look at our justice system and if what we're doing is actually really effective, and then also how we, you know, kind of glorify these serial killers and if we're doing the right thing by how we go about these situations. It's just very, very interesting, very thought-provoking, and if you like reading thrillers, I highly recommend this book and I think that you would enjoy it. The next book on this list is going to be So Happy For You by Celia Lasky, and this is one that I struggle to recommend this book to wide audiences because this is definitely a book that's only gonna work for a specific group of people. Because in this story, we're following this protagonist named Robin, and she had this best friend in high school named Ellie, and they've kind of, you know, grown apart over the years. They've just really changed personality-wise. Like, they're not really the same people they used to be, but Ellie is getting married, and so she asks Robin to be her maid of honor at the wedding, and Robin just does doesn't really get the whole wedding thing. You know, she's not really big on weddings. Like, for example, just the opening sentence of this book says, if you want to know the story of how my best friend and I ended up trying to kill each other, I should probably start with the night she asked me to be her maid of honor. Like, really great opening line right there. Like, I just love so much about this book, but the reason why I say that this book will only be for a certain audience is because our protagonist, Robin, will probably drive most people absolutely insane. Like, I actually found her to be so freaking hilarious and at times very relatable, but like to an extreme that I would never personally take it. But this book is just fun, it's chaotic, it's ridiculous, but it's like actually in the best way. Like, I just had such a fun time with this book, and I do think that this book has a lot to say about our society and how obsessed we get with weddings and like the idea of weddings and how kind of like outrageous and ridiculous some weddings can be, or how ridiculous some brides can put expectations on their own bridesmaids. Like, there's just a lot of really great conversation about that too in this book, so really enjoyed this one, but it definitely will not be for everyone. And then the next book I have on this list is going to be Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney, and this one is actually going to be my book troop pick for the month of December. So if you would like to read this one along with me and with us, then you know you totally can. We're gonna be having a live show in December to discuss this book, and this one's actually going to be a reread for me because this is one of my favorite thrillers that I've read this year. Alice Feeney has been really impressing me ever since, you know, Rock, Paper, Scissors. I loved that book, gave it 5 stars, and then this one, oh my gosh, freaking top tier, so good. In this book, we're following this protagonist named Daisy Darker, which, by the way, coolest name ever, right? It's like Donnie Darko or something. It's like a freaking superhero name, and she is going back to her grandma's house, like her grandmother's home, where she lives on this tiny little island, and there's gonna be like this major storm happening, and they're going to the island to celebrate the grandma's like 90th birthday or something like that. It's like a huge birthday celebration, but then when they get there, somebody gets murdered. Like, somebody's murdered instantly, and then every hour as it's counting down, somebody keeps getting murdered. It's like they're getting picked off one by one. It's very Agatha Christie vibes. And the thing that's so great about this book too is that it has the best atmosphere, because it's like there's the storm, you know, so they're trapped in this home on this island, and it's also like takes place around Halloween. Like, it's like the night of like October 30th going into the morning of the 31st or something like that. It's really cool. And this book just has the best atmosphere, really interesting characters, and kind of shocking plot twists. Like, there were things happening at the end of this book I was like, wait, bitch, what the fuck? Really love Daisy Darker, and I can't wait to read it with more of you, hopefully next month, and have a discussion about it. I know my sister's gonna be reading this book very soon because she's gonna be my co-host for the month of December, so really excited about it. I love Daisy Darker. I highly recommend. And then the next book I would recommend is actually going to be Runtime by Catherine Ryan Howard. This is another one that I read it this summer, and I went in kind of like not really expecting much, and I had the best time with this book. And in this story, we're following this actress who feels like she's kind of at the breaking point, or she feels like she's starting to question whether or not acting is really for her, you know, like she's just hit a wall in her career. And then she gets this phone call that, you know, they want to cast her as the lead role in this horror movie that they're working on. And so she flies out like the next day, but everything is like super shady on the set. Like, there's only men on the set. Like, she is the only sole woman. They're filming like out in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere, and she just starts to get all these different like weird red flags. Like, she starts to feel like people are watching her. There's like great scenes in this book of her being in this like cabin in the middle of the woods, and she's like starting to feel like somebody's watching her or like stalking her. Oh my gosh, this book is so entertaining. I feel like I've discovered about myself that I absolutely love reading thrillers or any kind of books that take place on the set of a movie, but especially a horror movie, because it's so creepy, right? Because you never know if like they're actually doing creepy things just for the sake of like, oh, we're, you know, producing and making a horror movie, or if it's actually like red flags and like people are being shady, you know, because it's like they'll tell like people in that area or the neighborhood, they're like, don't be alarmed if you hear screaming, you know, like we're just filming a horror movie. But it's like, bitch, what? Like, if I was the only woman on that set, I'd be like, it's just very interesting, very entertaining. I don't think that the end of this book is like the most shocking, crazy thing ever, but I just really enjoyed my time reading this. Like, then I would also highly recommend The Butcher by Jennifer Hillier. This is another one that I read this summer. This one's actually a backlist title from Jennifer Hillier. It's one that I've been hoping to get to for quite some time because I've heard so many comparisons to Dexter with this book, and I'm happy to tell you that those comparisons are 100% accurate, because this book is very, very Dexter vibes, okay? So in this story, we're following this police chief named Edward, and he was the one who took down Seattle's most notorious serial killer, who was called the Butcher. And that was 30 years ago, right, that he took down this serial killer, and now he's this 80-year-old man who is retiring. And now we're following from the point of view of his son, Matt, who is an aspiring chef. He's also working in Seattle, and there are murderers that are just like the Butcher, and people are starting to think that the Butcher is back, and they don't know how it's possible because they thought that they had taken him down 30 years ago, but no, bitch, the Butcher is here and well. And it's very interesting, you know, because this is a book where it's not a big reveal like who the Butcher is, because right in the start of this book, you learn immediately who the Butcher is. And so I don't think this is the kind of thriller necessarily that will have a lot of like, you know, plot twists necessarily. Like there's not a ton of like plot twists in the plot, but the things these characters get themselves into, oh my gosh, like the way this plot goes, it is so fascinating because this book was freaking addicting. Oh my gosh, I even read this when I was in a reading slump, and this book is like 400 pages long, okay? It's a mass market paperback, but it's about 400 pages, and I finished this in like a night or two because I was glued to this and I had to know what happened. It also just has this really great ending where like all the shit just like hits the fan at the same time, and you're just like, ooh. It's also really cool though in this book because you get not only the point of view of Edward and then his like, you know, grandson Matt or whatever, but you also get the point of view of Matt's girlfriend, and she believes that her mother was killed by the Butcher, and she's currently writing a true crime book about the Butcher. So there's just so many interesting elements to this book. You know, I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend. And then another recent book that I just read is The Family Game by Catherine Steadman. This is a book that I went into thinking I wasn't gonna enjoy it. I don't know why, but I think it's because, you know, this author is an author that I have tried some of her other thrillers and they've just never really worked for me. But this book was absolutely fascinating. We're following this woman who is British and she's gonna be marrying this American guy. She works for a book publisher in New York City, and this book all takes place around Christmas time. And this book is really festive. You know, like I wasn't expecting it to take place around the holidays as much as it did. Like almost all of this book takes place right around Christmas. It's really fun. And so this woman, you know, she gets engaged to this American man before she's even really met his family. And so then there's this rush of like, oh well, now it's time to meet my family. And you know, the family, they have this like one family member that they don't talk about anymore. And even our protagonist, you know, she has this mysterious past as well, because she's like, if they had known what I've done, I would go to prison for the rest of my life and stuff like that. So you're kind of like, okay, what's going on here? Like not only is the family shady, she's shady as well. And there's just a whole lot going on in here. There are even some scenes in this book that involve a game of sorts, and I found them to be so creepy. Like it was just written so well. I was like, bitch. So I really enjoyed The Family Game. I had a really fun time with this one. Another book that I very recently just read that I would love to add to the list is Stay Awake by Megan Golden. And so in this book, we're following this protagonist named Liv, who, you know, she wakes up in the back of a taxi and she has absolutely no memory of how she got there. And she shows up at her apartment and there's other people living there, and they're like, no, this is our apartment. You don't live here. Tries to find her phone, you know, like on her body, and instead of her phone, she finds a knife that has like blood on it. And then she looks on her wrist and there's a little like note that's scribbled on her wrist that says stay awake. And so then while all of that shenanigans is going on, we also follow Liv 2 years ago. Like we get her perspective 2 years ago when she was living in New York City. She was thriving, and we kind of see, you know, in those alternate chapters like how things might have gotten to how they are now. And in this book we also do follow from the point of view of a detective who's working on this crime scene. And it's creepy because this crime scene that the detective is working on, it's kind of similar to like what's going on with her, you know, messages on her wrist, because there's this victim that's covered in blood, and on the window somebody wrote wake up in the victim's blood. And so it seems like it might be kind of connected to what happened with her. And so now she's all paranoid that she's like, did I have something to do with that murder and I don't remember anything? This book, it gets compared to, you know, the movie Memento that's directed by Christopher Nolan, because if you haven't seen that movie, it also deals with a protagonist who doesn't have any memories and he writes messages to himself on his skin in order to remember things. And I think it is kind of like Memento in that way. Like I will give credit where credit is due. I'm not gonna lie though, I do think the ending, like there were some scenes towards the end that got a little bit repetitive for me, and there was one twist that I thought was a little bit predictable, but otherwise I had a really fun time with this. I still gave it 4 stars. I think it's a really interesting, fast-paced thriller. Like it is so quick to get through. The next book on this list is going to be Look Closer by David Ellis. This is a thriller recommendation that I actually read because of you. You know, I read it in a vlog that was reading your thriller recommendations. We follow this couple named Simon and Vicky, and they're this wealthy couple that lives in Chicago. And then this woman is found hanging in a mansion a few blocks over from their suburb. And after this event happens, a ton of things just start to spiral out of control. This book is an interesting thriller because I do think it's best to go in knowing absolutely nothing. Like you just need to know that bare minimum. And if you enjoy books that kind of follow like married couples with like secrets and past and history and just crazy kinds of things, oh my gosh, this book is just so interesting. And this book, I wouldn't even recommend it for the huge shocking plot twist, because like there are a few things at the end I was like, wait a minute, like what? Like this book does definitely have the shocking plot twist, but also the way this author is just so sneaky, you know, like this book just has so many constant twists and turns, and the author will constantly just misguide you, you know, like he'll make you think one thing about the characters and then the next second he'll just pull out the rug from under you and you'll just be like, wait a second, everything's a lie. And it's just really fascinating. This one also definitely has those like Joe Goldberg vibes, especially at the beginning of this book. Like our main dude, Simon, you're like, hello, Joe Goldberg 2.0. Like he's just creepy and weird and stalkerish, and I just loved so much of this book. Like it was just so entertaining to read. And then I would also recommend The Perfect Child by Lucinda Berry, and this is actually another book that I also read in the thriller vlog where you recommended me thrillers. And in this story, we're following this couple named Christopher and Hannah who are happily married. He's a surgeon and she's a nurse. And one day there's this little girl that comes into their, you know, hospital, and she's like kind of covered in blood and she's really tiny, like really malnourished. This couple has been dealing with some infertility, you know, like they've been trying to have children and they've been really struggling to have children. And Christopher just gets this immediate connection to this little girl that came into the hospital, whereas Hannah is kind of struggling a little bit more because it turns out this little, you know, girl child is kind of a demon just to Hannah, you know, like she's really close to Christopher and then she's an absolute demon to Hannah. And this is just this wild story about how they decide to, you know, adopt her and take her home and have this daughter be their child. And this story is just like, it's like all of my worst fears of ever becoming a parent. And the things that happen in this book, like, oh my god, freaking a nightmare of a situation, like constantly over and over again. I just felt so bad for this family, but this book was just so entertaining. To be honest, I was kind of shocked by where this book ended up going because, you know, this book obviously does remind me quite a bit of The Push, which is one of my favorite books that have kind of a similar premise to this. But the difference, I think, in my mind is that The Push reads a little bit more of like a psychological slow burn kind of like literary fiction, like really beautiful, you know, and really horrific and scary because of how real that book feels. And then this kind of reads like the blockbuster movie version of The Push, if that makes sense. Like this one seems like it's more of like an action thriller as opposed to like a psychological, like literary type of style, if that makes sense. This one seems like it would appeal to more mainstream audiences, and I think because of that, I was really freaking shocked by where this one ended up going because I was like, whoa, like I just didn't see it going there. You know, like this book took it there, it went there. The next book I would recommend is probably my most recent read that I have on this whole list, and that's Youre Invited. And this is a book that, I'm not gonna lie, it took me some time to get into this book, and for the first like 200 or even 250 pages, I was like, you know, I don't know about this. Like it's just really slow, really repetitive. But then the last like third of this book surprised the heck out of me. I thought the last third of this book was so freaking good. And so in this story, we're following this woman who, you know, she's like browsing social media and she notices that her old best friend, like this woman that she used to be really close with, like freaking tight, but she's not really that close to her anymore. She finds out that she's getting married to her ex-boyfriend, and then her old best friend actually reaches out to her through email and she's like, hey, I didn't know if you saw that I'm marrying, you know, this guy who I know is your ex-boyfriend, but like I would love it if you came to the wedding. Like it would mean so much to me and my family to have you there. And so she decides to go to the wedding. But then things quickly turn south when, you know, the bride goes missing and is presumed, like people think that she got murdered. And of course the number one suspect is our protagonist because she had reason, you know, like she was marrying her ex-boyfriend and she was very like vocal about how pissed she was about it. Like everybody knew. And it's really interesting the way this book is told, you know, because we get the events leading up to the wedding, and then we also do in between, we get like interview clips of all the different family members talking to into the police, and it's very like Big Little Lies in the way that it's like, oh well, everybody knew that she was gonna be the one to do this because she had an agenda against her, and you know, she was jealous because her ex-boyfriend, and like all this shit, right? I will admit that these interview clips and most of the book leading up to page 200, I was like, okay, this is kind of slow, it's kind of repetitive, but then this book just does something about 2/3 of the way in that's like different, and I was like, oh, okay, like what is this? The plot just keeps getting more and more interesting towards the end. I was just like, oh, like, okay, I didn't see it going in that direction, and I just really appreciated it, you know, because I felt like I wasn't totally sure about this one at the start, but then by the end I was really digging it. And I also just like love thrillers that involve weddings. I don't know why, it makes it so much more entertaining for me. All right, and then the last thriller that I have on this list is going to be The Housemaid, and this is one that I also read because of your recommendations during that video. This is one that really surprised me because for most of this book as well, like for the first like 2/3 or something, I was like, yeah, I don't know, I don't usually love this kind of twist in thrillers, and then the ending just absolutely floored me. Ending, especially that last, like, it's like the little epilogue at the end, I was like, what? Like, wait, what? And so this book is really entertaining. You know, we're following this woman who she's having a hard time, you know, like she's been dealing with homelessness, she's been dealing with all kinds of awful things recently. And so she gets the opportunity, you know, to be this housemaid for this couple and this family that's kind of like a rich as fuck family, and she gets the opportunity to work for them. So she's like, yeah, immediately jumps on it, you know, moves into the house. And it's kind of creepy because there's a lot of red flags kind of immediately, you know, because they move her into like the attic room of the house, and it's literally like the size of a closet, and they're just like, oh yeah, well, you know, even though they have this whole mansion where she could be. And then it's also creepy because she finds out almost right away that the door can lock from the outside. So like, what the fuck is up with that? And then it quickly becomes like a really frustrating situation, you know, for our protagonist, because she'll be like doing her, you know, regular things like cleaning or whatever, and the wife, Nina, she'll be like, oh well, I didn't tell you to do that, even though she very much just did, you know, like she'll be constantly acting like, oh, why would you do that? Like, I didn't tell you to do that. And she's constantly like changing her mind and blaming her for things that she did tell her to do. It's just madness, you know, it is madness. I just feel like this book, while it isn't the most shocking thriller I've ever read necessarily, like I feel like if you read a lot of thrillers, for the most part, you can kind of predict where this story is heading at certain times. But also, I was just so freaking entertained. The entire time I read this, I was like, oh my gosh, like let's fucking go, like spill the tea, let's go, the drama, it's so juicy. And then at the end I was like, okay, epilogue just sold me, 4 stars, let's go. And I don't know, I ended up enjoying this one so much more than I originally thought, so like that's always exciting, you know, like I love when that happens. All right, so those are all of the different thriller recommendations that I have for you today. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts are on them, what you're thinking about them, and let me know if you plan to read any of these books now that I've recommended them. I would love to know that as well. Once again, as a reminder, I will have all of the previous thriller recommendations down below if you want to go and check out even more thriller recs. This is video number 11. I have so many videos like this. And of course, let me know any thriller recommendations that you might have for me, depending on the kind of thrillers that I enjoy. I would really appreciate that as well. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!